Hello learners. We have been discussing about environmental economics in all these lectures. We have understood the concept of environmental economics. We have also talked about that why do we need to study environmental economics as a different subject altogether. We have understood that how in environmental goods there is a problem of externality and market failures. In the previous lecture on market failures, we have been talking about that what are the reasons that a market failure takes place in case of environmental goods. One of the reasons which we have discussed was public goods. And in today's lecture, we will be talking about what are public goods. Then we will also understand the properties of public goods. Thereafter, we will differentiate between a private good and a public good. And then, of course, we are going to understand that how a public good leads to a market failure. So, as we've already seen, in case of environmental goods, which at many times are natural resources, we consume those goods without actually paying for them. And when we talk about goods like parks, when we talk about things like national defense, clean air or water, we are consuming all those goods without actually making a payment for them. So when goods have no prices, what happens is that the market forces then do not normally allocate these resources. Why? Because then the private individual do not have the incentive to produce these goods because they are not going to get the money payment for that. Hence, the private markets and in those cases fail to provide the socially efficient quantity of these goods. What may so happen is that the production of these goods may be totally absent, or what may happen is that they may be producing less than what is required. Then this will lead to a market failure. A few important characteristics of the goods we need to understand. We have taken already an overview of these goods when we talked about market failure. But let me just revise it for you because it is very important that we know these concepts so that in order to understand the further concepts. Now we say a good has two basic characteristics. One, it can be excluded from consumption, and second, it may be rival in consumption. So if a good is excludable, this means that a person can be prevented from using it. That is, I am able to let certain people consume that good and not let certain people consume that good. So when we are excluding the consumption of a good intentionally, then that good is called as an excludable good. But if we are not able to exclude the consumption of that good or a service for everyone or for certain people, then it is called as not excludable. Some example of excludable goods I have given are, for example, a pizza. Okay, that is, if somebody is willing to pay for a consumption of a pizza, we may be offering it to him. But if someone is not willing to pay or he does not have the ability to pay for that pizza, we will exclude him from consumption of this pizza, or this pizza is not offered to him for consumption. Similarly, a wireless internet access, the Wi-Fis that we have. Non-excludable means that even if you want to, you cannot disallow people to not use that good. You cannot prevent them from using it. For example, national defense. This is somebody is not paying for national defense means that we cannot say that, okay, you will not be defended from the enemy action of this against this country. So those goods become not excludable. The second characteristic of a good is that the goods are rival in consumption. Rival in consumption means that if one person uses that, it diminishes the uses of other. Okay, that is, if there is a limited availability of resources, if I use that, then whatever is left over is available to the others. This means my consumption of that good has reduced the total quantity available to the rest of the people. So, those goods are called as rival in consumption. For example, sandwiches. There are limited number of sandwiches which are available. So, if I consume, if let us say there are 10 sandwiches available, I consume 2 of it, this means for the rest of the people here, only 8 sandwiches are left. So, that is called as a rivalry in consumption. Similarly, a good may be non-rival or not rival. That is, that consumption by one will not have an impact on the consumption to the others. For example, a street light. If there is a street light in my lane, and if my house is getting some light of it, or if the people passing through that lane are getting benefited by that street lighting, does not mean that the rest of the people who are going to come through the lane will get less of that street light. This means that that good is not rival in consumption. So these are the two main characteristics on which we will be dividing, or we will be identifying goods into various types, particularly the public goods and the private goods. Now, coming to a definition of public goods, we say public goods or services. Whenever we are saying goods, in this context, of course, we are meaning services as well. So, public goods or services are those that can be consumed by several individuals simultaneously without diminishing the value of consumption to any one of the individuals. That is, we are saying that if someone is consuming that good or a service, so several individuals are consuming it simultaneously, but their simultaneous consumption is not diminishing the value of consumption to any one individual. This means that when we are talking about a pure public good, the two main characteristics are that these goods are non-excludable and they are non-rival. That is, these goods, their consumption or their availability does not reduce if many people are consuming them simultaneously, and neither we can exclude certain people who may be paying less for it or who may not be paying for the consumption of these goods to not enjoy the benefits of these goods. For example, environmental amenities, particularly like clean air, is something which we call as a public good. So, if I am breathing clean air in my city, it is non-rival because my breathing of clean air is not going to reduce the availability of clean air to the rest of the citizens of my city. Similarly, I cannot exclude the other citizens of my city for not consuming this clean air. So, generally, the environmental amenities that we talk about are having both these characteristics, that is, they are non-excludable and they are non-rival. Again, I will further detail this concept of non-excludability for you. Whenever we are saying non-excludable, we are saying that the benefits of the public good cannot be confined to only those who have paid for it, as we have just seen the example of clean air, or let us say national defense. If somebody is not coming under the tax bracket, then we cannot deny that citizen of the country not to take the benefit of the national defense or civil defense services. We cannot say that you cannot take the help of police because you have not paid for the service of police. So, in case of public goods, we cannot confine it to only those who have paid for it. Non-payers also enjoy the benefit of the consumption of these goods for no financial cost. So, even if there is no financial cost paid for the consumption of this particular good, this non-payer is also enjoying the consumption of this public good. For example, we have just talked about is, let us say, national defense. The second characteristic which we have said about the public good is that they are non-rival in consumption, meaning to say that the consumption of the public good by one person does not reduce the availability of a good to the others. So, we all consume the same amount of public good even though our tastes for these goods may differ. Maybe I am valuing clean water, clean air, natural resources more than you. But even though our tastes are different, we still consume the same amount of that public good. And this is a very important distinguishing characteristic on which we are going to derive the demand of a public good. So, as I've just said, the example of a street light is a case of a non-rival consumption of a public good. Now, let us just see that what is a private good. A private good has both the characteristics which are opposite to the public good. First, the private goods can be excluded from the consumption. That is, consumers who do not want to pay, who are not willing to pay, or who are not able to pay for consuming these goods or services, they can be excluded from consumption of these private goods. For example, if you wish to watch an IPL match in a stadium, but if you can only watch that match by paying for purchasing a ticket. And if I'm not willing to pay that amount of money to buy a ticket to go watch an IPL match in the stadium, I will be not allowed to enter the stadium. This would mean that I am able to exclude those consumers who are not willing to pay for this good from those who are willing to pay for this good. So, many examples will come in your mind when we talk about private goods. For example, a ticket for a theatre, a meal in the restaurant. So, all those who are willing to pay or who are able to pay will be using these private goods. Second characteristic is rivalry. We have just seen in case of public goods, there is non-rivalry in consumption. Whereas in private good, there is rivalry. Rivalry, I'm sure you would have understood by now, it means that if one person is consuming that product or good or a service, it reduces the amount left for others to consume. Because scarce resources are used up in producing and supplying these goods and services. So, if a good is limited in quantity, and I'm able to say that if I use this good, then the balance which is left is for the rest of the society. So, my consumption of that good has reduced the availability of that resource, of that good or of a service less for the others. So, that is what is called as rivalry. So, rivalry in consumption and excludability, these are the two things which make private good different from a public good. This is one interesting diagram which I have put it in front of you, wherein we have taken both the characteristics, that is rivalry and excludability, and then we have classified based on these two main characteristics the various types of goods that we see. So, just let's have a look at all the four quadrants which we have made. If a good is rivalrous and it is rivalrous, it is excludable. That is, the goods, I am able to exclude the people who are not going to pay for it from consuming it, and the consumption of some reduces the availability of these goods for the other, makes its rival. So, if a good is both excludable and if a good is both rival, we call these goods as private goods. But in case the good is not excludable and it is non-rival, the goods will be called as a public good. So if you see, private goods and public goods are standing or are at the extreme ends of the continuum. One is a classic case where you are able to exclude the consumption of that good or a service, and also that good or a service is rival in consumption. So that we have called as a private good. On the other hand, we have a good on the extreme end where the good cannot be excluded and also it is non-rivalrous. We have called as at a public good. So let us say the example of clean air, national defense, and many more I am sure learners you can think of is a case of public good. Whereas a private good, for example, food, clothing, cars, personal electronics, where the goods are excludable and rival are called as private goods. Another two types of goods which fall between these two continuums are called as common goods or common resources, and the second is called as club goods. What are common goods? Let us see it. Common goods are those which are non-excludable. That is, you cannot exclude someone from the consumption of it. But if they are consumed by everybody, the stock of these goods or services will reduce with consumption of each. Hence, these goods have a characteristic of rivalry, even though they are non-excludable. We are going to do a separate lecture on this concept of common goods, which is also called as common property resources. For example, coal, fish stock, timber, they are all the examples of common goods. For example, I am saying coal, I cannot exclude someone from not using the coal which is below the earth, from mining it until unless government sets some rules and regulations. But if more and more people are using this coal, the available quantity of coal will eventually reduce for the others to consume. Hence, they are the characteristic of rivalry. The fourth type of good which we say is called as a club good. Now, what is a club good? Which is excludable, but they are non-rival. Okay, for why they are called as club goods is, for example, if you want to take a club membership, all those who are paying for membership will be using those goods or using that service. So we are excluding all those who are not going to pay for the membership of a club. But giving membership to one doesn't reduce the benefits of the others. For example, satellite TV, the DTH for your, let us say, Tata Sky or any kind of satellite cable TV that we have. If we don't pay for certain channels, we may be excluded from watching it. But me watching that channel does not reduce the consumption of watching that channel of my neighbor. Therefore, they are called as club goods. So they're excludable, that is, we can charge certain fees, but they're non-rival, means if I'm using that, doesn't reduce the consumption availability for the rest of the people. So they are called as club goods. So as you can understand, so we have a big continuum starting from private goods to public goods, and the two fall in between. So this is, I thought it's this diagrammatic representation will help you learners to understand this concept better. Now moving on to a very important aspect, understanding private goods and public goods and their aggregate demand curve. We have already understood that what is a private good and how they are different from public goods. Now, if we want to set a price for these goods, or if we want to understand that how much of these goods should be produced, we need to understand that what is the demand of these goods in the market. Whenever we talk about private goods, we know that the market demand of a private good can be taken by horizontally submitting the individual demand curves. Let us say we have two consumers in the market, or let us say we have got three consumers in the market, A, B and C. Person A will give his willingness to pay for that consumption of that good. Person B will also give his demand schedule, from which we will get the demand curve, and person C will also give his demand schedule. So in order to get the market demand, what we do is that we add up the demand of A to the demand of B to the demand of C. So that is what we call as summated market demand curve. In case of private goods, what happens is, since these goods are rival and excludable, each consumer is going to show his willingness to purchase at different prices. That is what we call as a demand schedule. That is, if the price is, let us say, 10, how much of quantity I am willing to buy. If the price is 11, how much of the quantity I am willing to buy. So I give my demand schedule. From my demand schedule, a demand curve is derived. Similarly, another consumer will give his demand schedule and will get a demand curve. So eventually what is happening is that each consumer is showing that at this particular price, how much I am willing to pay, and the producer, by adding up the total demand of, let us say, A plus B plus C at price of 10, can derive that what is the market quantity demanded which I need to supply. So it shows that how much quantity for a given price. Let us say if the price is 10, how much quantity the total market is demanding. So for a private good, always see, remember, we will be doing it graphically also later on, that it is the horizontal summation of the individual demand curve. Let us see now what happens in case of a public good. Now, public good we have seen are those goods, let's say pure public goods. They are those goods which are non-rival and they are non-excludable. This would mean that now if we want to estimate that what is the market demand of the public goods, so that we know that how much in the market can be produced. Unlike the private goods, here it is the vertical summation of the individual demand curves. Whereas in case of private goods, it was the horizontal summation. But in case of public goods, we will be summating or we will be adding the individual demand curves vertically. Why? Because demand, in case of public goods, individuals can enjoy the same quantity because they are non-rivaling consumption. Hence, in case of public goods, when we get the aggregate demand curve, by vertically adding up the individual demand curves, it shows that how much price for a given quantity. That is, since the quantity is given to us, for this quantity I am willing to pay this price. For person A says. Person B says, for this quantity I am willing to pay a different price. So it is not the price in this case, it is we are determining that if the quantity is given, how much price they will be willing to pay. Whereas in case of private goods, we had said how much quantity for a given price. Therefore, the derivation of the aggregate demand curve in case of private goods and public goods is different. Now, let us just see graphically that how we will be deriving the aggregate demand curve. I have just explained that in case of private goods, it is the horizontal summation of the demand curves of the individuals. So this graph which I have taken shows, let us say there are two consumers, A and B. This first is showing D1 is the demand curve of individual 1, D2 is the demand curve of individual 2. Now, if it is a private good, it is showing that this P1 is the maximum price which this person is willing to pay. Correct? And for C1 star quantity of good, this person is willing to pay a price P star. Whereas, when we move to person 2, we see that the maximum price which this person 2 is willing to pay is P2, which is more than P1 of the first person. Okay. And at this P star price, the demand for person 2 is C2 star. So what do? Because it is a private good, we will add up these two curves, that is D1, D2 horizontally. Therefore, you see this curve D1 plus D2. You see a kink at this point, means between this point to this point, let us say between point A to B, the aggregate demand curve is only reflecting the demand of person 2. Because at this point, this is the maximum price. This is P1, which the person 1 has said that I am willing to pay only P1. But after B, what is happening is demand of person 1 and demand of person 2 both are coming. Hence, you see a kink here. Okay, so summated demand curve is made up of the demand curve of 1 plus the demand curve of 2. So this is the demand curve, and if this is the supply curve, this point where summated demand is equal to supply gives us the equilibrium price, and this is the output which is going to be produced. So the producer of this private good knows that if I am going to sell at P star, this is the total demand. And this C shows C1 max plus C2 max. That is, this is the maximum which person A is willing to buy. And this point D2 is the maximum which person B is willing to buy. So together we get this C. So in case of private goods, we are seeing that there is a horizontal summation of the demand curves, because we know that for a given price, how much person 1 is willing to buy, and for this given price P star, how much is the person 2 willing to buy. Okay, but this is not the case of public goods, as we have just seen, basically because of the characteristic of non-exclusion and non-rivalry. So just let's have a look at what happens when we want to derive the aggregate demand curve for a public good. As I just told you, in case of a public good, it is horizontal summation. So if you see, this is the demand curve of person, let us say 1. This is the demand curve of person 2. So this shows, this demand curve is showing that P1 is the maximum price which he is willing to pay, and for what quantity? Quantity is Q1, which is the maximum quantity. That is, if there is 0 price, this is the maximum which I am willing to buy. Now, person 2 has a different demand curve. He values more of this quantity. So he says he wants to buy more of it. Okay. Now here what we will do is, we will add up these two curves horizontally. So this Q1 max is matching with this summated demand curve's kink. Okay. So till this means that this is the maximum demand from person 1. So this becomes the kink. After this is the total demand coming from both of them. So this kink shows, now if for example, this is your supply curve, then the market supply will be Q star. So unlike your private goods, where we saw that how much is the maximum quantity which the, how much is the price which the person is willing to pay for certain quantity. Here we are talking about this, for this given quantity Q star, how much are you willing to pay? Okay, so that is the difference between your aggregate demand curve of private goods and public goods. So in aggregate demand curves, it is the sum of the individual value for the unit. Now, how do public goods and market failure come in picture? Now, when we are talking about a free market economy, we say it will fail to deliver or allocate a socially efficient quantity of public good because of their characteristics of excludability, non-excludability and non-rivalry. We have already discussed that because of non-exclusion, we have a problem of free rider. Free rider means people will be consuming or taking the benefit of these goods without actually paying for the cost of provisioning, because you cannot exclude them from the consumption of this. Now, when this free rider problem comes in picture, what happens is that the free market mechanism or the private market is either unwilling to produce or supply these goods, or it may so happen is that they may be producing less than what is socially optimum or socially required. Hence, the market is unable to allocate the resources efficiently or either produce less of what is socially optimally required, which we say is a problem of market failure. Let us take an example. Let us say if there is a block of flats which are available, and there is a group of residents, the Resident Welfare Association thinks that it is better that we have a good lighting and a security system. But in this group of people, there may be many who might try to avoid the payment. Why? Because they know even if we don't pay, or even if we pay less, if there is a good security system installed, or if there is a good lighting in my residential area, it will give me the benefit as well. So these people, even if they do not want to pay, or if they don't pay, they are going to get this benefit of increased security. This is what we call as market failure due to the problem of free rider. That is, these are those people who are taking the benefit of the provision of that good without actually paying for it. Now, since it's a public good, generally what happens is that the government takes control of it. Otherwise, if it left to the free market system, these goods may not be made available. So, this is an example. Now, let us understand graphically the non-rivalry, heterogeneity of these goods and market failure. This is again coming from the derivation of the aggregate demand curve, which we have done for both the private goods and the public goods. First, we will understand that how the quantity is being determined in case of a private good. Let us say we have got two individuals, 1 and 2, and they have given their demand curves as D1 and D2. Right? If it is a perfectly competitive market, we know that the price will be equal to the marginal cost. And because it is a private good, the producer is able to get the summated demand curve by adding horizontally the demand curve of person 1 and demand curve of person 2. So, the point where the demand curve is meeting their marginal cost curve, we get your quantity. Okay. Now, what happens here is that in this case, both of them has shown that if this is the price, let us say P star, which is decided by the market, person A is going to consume Q1 and person 2 is going to consume Q2. So, and the total demand or the total quantity will be Q star, which is equal to Q1 plus Q2. So, this is the spending done by person 1 and this green is the spending done by person 2. So, that's a very simple case where we are saying that because it's a private good, you are able to exclude people who are not willing to buy these goods at P star. Now, in this case, person 1 is buying less and person 2 is buying more because they have a different demand schedule, and we know that it is the case of a private good, we are able to exclude these people. So, now let us come to understand that what are public goods and how the non-rivalry in consumption leads to market failure. As we have seen in the previous case, what was happening was that in case of a private good, we had horizontally summated the demand curves to understand that how much quantity Q star for this quantity, how much price you are willing to pay, or for this particular price P star, what is the quantity which person 1 and person 2 is demanding. But in case of a public good, as we have seen, what is going to happen is that there will be a vertical summation. Vertical summation means that this D1 and D2 are going to be added. So you will get a summated D which is equal to D1 plus D2. And we are adding it horizontally. Sorry, we are adding it vertically. When we are adding it vertically, what do we get? Now, if it is a perfect market again, let us say, what does perfect market say? And if we are assuming a constant marginal cost, it says that your price should be equal to marginal cost. So, this P star should be the price. But if this price is set in the market, is the person 1 going to get anything, going to demand anything? No. Why? Because he has said that my highest willingness to pay is P1, which is, now this P1 is less than P star. So this means that this person 1 is not going to demand anything of that particular public good at a price P star. But now let us see what is going to happen with person 2. Person 2 demand curve is being shown by D2. Now D2 shows that he is willing to buy Q2 at P star. So this means that the market should produce Q2. But remember that the public good is a non-rival good. Now, if this Q2 is going to be produced, the benefit of that Q2 is also going to be taken by person 1. Correct? So, without paying, this person is going to enjoy the benefits of these goods. Therefore, what we see in case of public goods is what we call as a market failure. Efficiently, what should have been done is that Q star should have been produced, because that is where your summated demand curve is coming equal to the marginal cost. But we are going to produce only Q2, and this Q2 is less than Q star. So, suboptimal production of this good is taking place because it is good which is non-rivalrous in consumption. Also, when this happens, we see that this Q star, if efficiently what would have should been done is that this Q star should have been produced, and depending on this amount, available amount, person 1 should have been charged a certain price, P1 star, person 2 should have been charged a certain price, P2. Also, this area which you see here is a mirror image of what we see in private good. So, a person who has a greater willingness to pay, that is person 2, is going to pay a higher price compared to the person 1. Efficiently, socio-optimally, it should have been done. But actually, if left to the private market forces, they will be producing Q2. So, because it is a non-rival good and there is a different choice, different willingness to pay, hence we will see that less of is going to be produced in case of public goods. As we have just said, unlike private goods, inefficiency arises as unlike price, quantity is not an effective market mechanism, because here we are deciding how much quantity should be produced. Okay, it is the quantity which is determined, it is not the price. So, for a given quantity, individuals will not automatically self-select their optimal price, that I am selling you this quantity, tell me how much you are going to be priced. Rather, what they are going to say is, they will try to pay the lowest price possible, because they cannot be excluded from consuming that good. Right? In case of private good, what is happening is, I am asking that how much price are you willing, at this price, how much quantity you are demanding. Here, quantity is being given, and based on that quantity, I am asking you how much price are you willing to pay. Rationally, what happens is that people know that even if I quote a lesser price or the least price if I quote, I am still going to get the benefit of that good. So, they try to pay the lowest price because of the non-rivalry in consumption. Also, Market failure occurs because these goods are non-excludable. Individuals, as we've just seen, are incentivized to free ride. I know you cannot exclude me for using. So this free rider problem prevents the private firms from earning adequate revenues by selling public goods, because I know people who are not paying are also going to use it. Right? So my revenue will not be maximized. Hence, as a private firm, I may not be interested in giving this good or coming in the market to sell this public good. Hence, either the private markets are there, they will either produce less or they may not produce anything of a public good. Similarly, again, this graph explains you a similar thing where we are saying that this is a vertical summation where D1 is the demand curve of person 1, D2 is person 1, person 2, D3 is another, and sigma D is the D1 plus D2 equal to D3. Now, socially optimum price should quantity should be Q star, because that's where your marginal cost is becoming equal to the summated D. But what is going to happen is that the company may be only producing Q1. Why? Because they know that this is the price. Because you know that if you produce at Q star, even if this person is not producing at D1, the person 1 is not willing to pay anything for it, but still he will take the benefit, so they will stop at Q1. So markets because of non-excludability, they will not provide Q star, rather they will provide less. So this also leads to a market failure. So as we've just said, that this leads to under-provisioning of the public goods. As a result, market will not produce or they will produce less. Hence, there is a need for government intervention to address this market failure. Now, there is a very small concept which we have of what is called as public bads. Public bads is something which is imposing a cost or negative effect on the society. Okay, let us say traffic congestion, air pollution. There is something which is imposing a negative effect on the society. Also, they are also non-excludable. For example, if there is air pollution in, let us say, the case of Delhi, which we see every winter, what happens is that air pollution, everybody has to breathe in that polluted air. So nobody can exclude himself or herself from not breathing that polluted air. So they are non-excludability and they are non-rivalrous also. That is, doesn't mean that if I breathe polluted air, you will breathe less of polluted air. You are also going to breathe a similar amount of polluted air. But they are creating undesirable consequences on the individual. Hence, what happens in case of public goods is people want to exclude themselves. People do not want to breathe in that polluted air. People do not want to get stuck up in a traffic congestion. So, because these costs are creating negative effects on the society. So, unlike public goods where people wanted those goods without paying for it, here people say that okay, we do not want to consume these goods, and for that for not consuming they are willing to pay. So they are called as public bads because they are basically related to environmental degradation. Public goods are something which is creating a positive impact, whereas public bads are those which are creating a negative impact, and people do not want to exclude themselves from the consumption of these goods. So let's do a quick revision of whatever we have done in this lecture. We have talked about that public goods are those which benefit the society, but they are non-excludable and non-rivalrous. Because of their non-excludability and non-rivalry, this happens because of free rider problem is created, and wherein people want to consume but they don't want to pay, or they want to pay less for it. So this leads to under-provision of the private sector. Also, we understood a very important difference between private goods and public goods: aggregate demand summation. And then there is a small concept of public bads where we are saying that it is a cost or a negative effect on the society like air pollution and traffic congestion, and people want to consume less and less of it because they feel that it is better we get excluded from the consumption of these goods. So that's all in this lecture of public goods. In the subsequent lecture, we'll carry it forward and understand the other aspects of environmental economics. So thank you very much.